Breaking intel alert. And you're going to want to stick around for the next 60 seconds because what I'm about to show you was never meant for retail eyes. If you hold only 1,000 XRP, brace yourself, because leaked institutional data is revealing a valuation model that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about this asset. Like and subscribe. It genuinely helps push this message through the algorithm before it disappears again. Now, let's get into what's unfolding. Over the past 72 hours, a document quietly surfaced on a closed financial research network used by hedge fund analysts and liquidity desks. The file was titled Neutral Bridge Asset Efficiency Index, Confidential Draft. If that name sounds familiar, it should. The same language appeared months ago inside the Bank for International Settlements internal correspondence, the one Ripple was rumored to have co-authored. This leaked draft goes further. It doesn't just reference XRP as a bridge asset. It assigns it a Tier 1 liquidity multiplier coefficient, a number that effectively models how each dollar of XRP can facilitate $10 to $50 of transactional value once corridors are live. Let that sink in. The same math that underpins how fractional reserve banking multiplies deposits is now being applied to XRP's role in digital settlement. And buried 3 pages deep was a statement that stopped analysts cold. Phase 3 simulations confirm operational readiness of neutral liquidity routing through XRP-based corridors. Projected fair value range under activation conditions: 50 cents, $3 per unit. No, that's not a typo. $57 to $312. And before you assume this is retail speculation, remember, this report wasn't published on Reddit. It came from the same institutional research platform that prices sovereign debt and IMF liquidity risk. So why hasn't anyone talked about it? Because it wasn't meant for us. Within 24 hours, the document was pulled, URLs dead-linked, and the access token revoked. But screenshots were already circulating through encrypted channels used by on-chain analysts. And once that happened, the genie was out of the bottle. This leak confirms what many have suspected for years. XRP isn't being valued like a crypto anymore. It's being modeled like infrastructure. The same way AWS powers the internet behind the scenes, XRP is being positioned as the monetary layer beneath global settlement. That's why the timing of this leak matters. October 18th isn't just another date on the calendar. It's the next IMF reporting cycle for cross-border readiness. Every central bank testing ISO 2022 compliant corridors must file their results. And, according to internal correspondence, several of those corridors already reference RippleNet as the bridge layer. Translation: the system is live, just not public. Now pair that with the on-chain data. Whales holding between 1 and 5 million XRP have been steadily accumulating for 7 weeks straight. Their balance is growing while exchange reserves hit record lows. That's not random. That's institutional desks front-running activation. So when you connect the dots, the BIS document, the corridor activations, the whale accumulation, and now this valuation leak, you start to see the picture. We're not early investors in a coin, we're quiet stakeholders in a global liquidity grid that's about to go live. And here's the part that gives me chills. According to the metadata of that leaked file, the author tag wasn't Ripple Labs, it was Joint Working Group, Digital Liquidity Implementation Unit. Who's part of that group? The BIS Innovation Hub, the IMF Digital Currency Division, and 2 unnamed private participants, one confirmed as a U.S. Treasury liaison. In other words, this isn't retail speculation. This is the pre-activation paperwork for the digital financial system, and XRP sits at its center. So the real question now isn't, will it happen? It's how much longer until the public sees it? Because once activation goes live, once those corridors move from trial to production, XRP's price won't be based on what people think it's worth. It'll be based on what the system needs it to be worth to function. And that's a completely different equation. This is not financial advice, but if you understand what's happening, you already know. Leaks like this don't happen by accident. They're signals, quiet confirmations that the curtain is about to lift. So stay right here, because in the next section, I'll break down exactly what this hidden report implies about XRP's real valuation model, the liquidity multiplier math, and why it points to a system already halfway activated. When the leak first appeared, most people fixated on the dollar numbers, $57 to $312 per XRP. But the real story isn't the price target, it's the math that justifies it. Buried inside the report's appendix is something called the liquidity multiplier framework. It's the same modeling tool used by central banks to measure how much transactional velocity a single reserve unit can sustain. The concept is simple, but the implications are massive. Every modern financial system expands value through movement. A dollar sitting idle is worth one. A dollar circulating 10 times through credit, clearing, and settlement flows. That's a $10 impact. Now imagine that principle applied to a digital asset that can move instantly, settle globally, and recycle liquidity in seconds. That's what the analysts modeled. They assumed an average 20-to-1 liquidity multiplier once XRP corridors reach full deployment, meaning every $1 in XRP could facilitate $20 in real-world settlement volume. When you apply that to even a conservative fraction of global cross-border flows, roughly $155 trillion annually, you end up with a notional demand requiring trillions in on-chain liquidity capacity. Divide that capacity by XRP's fixed 100 billion supply, and the fair value band that leaked suddenly makes sense. And that's not theory. The model itself cited live test data from liquidity corridors between Singapore, London, and New York. The footnotes referenced authorized providers under NDAs, which means banks are already routing trial transactions through Ripple's backend. Here's where it gets wild. The document doesn't treat XRP like a cryptocurrency at all. It classifies it as a neutral settlement instrument. That's central bank language. It's the same terminology used in IMF liquidity buffer manuals and SWIFT modernization briefs. Once an asset crosses that line, it's no longer priced by speculation. It's priced by function, how much liquidity it can move, how stable its corridor uptime is, how predictable its value remains during high-volume settlement. And if you think that sounds like a security, it's not. It's infrastructure. That's why the Treasury Department's Cross-Border Modernization 2025 brief quietly referenced neutral digital liquidity assets. XRP was listed by name. So, what happens next? Institutional repricing. Once regulators label something as settlement infrastructure, funds can hold it as an operational reserve, not a speculative position. That means they're required to keep it stable, stocked, and liquid. It's the same shift that turned gold from a speculative metal into a monetary reserve. Different century, same playbook. Now look at the on-chain behavior that followed the leak. Custodial wallets tied to SBI Holdings, Tranglo, and MFS Africa all increased inbound transfers in 48 hours. Those entities aren't retail traders, they're corridor operators. When operators accumulate ahead of regulatory milestones, it signals something simple. They've been briefed. And if you think the timing is coincidence, note this. The ISO 2022 global synchronization window moved up again to Q4 2025. That's the same time frame cited in the leak's activation model. Everything BIS trials, Treasury language, corridor expansions is aligning to one invisible countdown. So why keep it buried? Because once the public connects the dots, price discovery starts early. Markets front-run certainty. If retail realized how little liquid supply remains once institutional corridors lock up reserves, they'd front-load demand. And that would destabilize rollout before the system even launches. That's why silence is policy. The fewer people who understand this before activation, the smoother the handoff from speculation to infrastructure. Think of what happens when utility overtakes perception. Every corridor that locks liquidity removes XRP from circulation. Every reserve that forms creates synthetic scarcity. And every live transaction increases velocity, feeding the same multiplier effect that the model predicted. It's a closed-loop engine. And once it starts, it self-reinforces. That's why insiders aren't talking, they're positioning. They understand the next bull run isn't just emotional, it's mechanical. A structural repricing baked into math, not memes. So when you hear people argue about XRP's slow performance, remember, the slower the chart, the tighter the coil. And the tighter the coil, the harder the breakout. Because price is just a lagging indicator of infrastructure catching up to awareness. The awareness is now. The infrastructure is done. The repricing is next. Stay tuned. In the next section, we'll expose the corridor activations, Treasury references, and BIS data trails that prove this hidden report isn't a theory. It's an implementation schedule disguised as a leak. Here's what ties the leak, the model, and the market behavior together. The activation trail. Every time Ripple has gone silent for long stretches, something big was happening behind the scenes. This time, the silence lines up with the final synchronization phase of ISO 2022, the same protocol connecting banks, governments, and payment networks under one digital standard. Out of nowhere, the testing window that was scheduled for 2026 quietly moved up to Q4 2025. That single update set off alarms among analysts tracking Ripple's corridors, because it means one thing: the rails are ready. Right after that calendar shift, Blockchain auditors noticed new transaction IDs tagged with CBXLRZ. Those tags didn't belong to exchanges. They were traced back to central bank test wallets inside the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Sandbox. Transfers weren't denominated in dollars or euros. They were settled in XRP. Small amounts at first, 50K, 120K XRP, then larger bursts in the millions, every one of them labeled liquidity routing test. That's not rumor. That's code-level confirmation that XRP is already being used for settlement, even if the public can't see the full dashboard yet. Then came the Treasury breadcrumb, buried in a 78-page PDF titled Cross-Border Modernization Brief 2025, is a line that reads, "Neutral liquidity assets currently under pilot evaluation include XRP and Ripple net-based corridors." It's the first time the US government has acknowledged XRP in an official modernization document. No press release, no tweet, just a single line in bureaucratic language. Exactly how world-changing policies always start. Now pair that with what Europe's doing. The European Central Bank just confirmed that its cross-currency settlement trials under the Eurochain program are using Ripple-compatible message architecture. That's not marketing copy, that's engineering. It means that the software driving European tokenized payments can talk directly to Ripple's network without translation. So let's connect the dots. BIS corridors running XRP trials. US Treasury acknowledging Ripple. European Central Bank using compatible rails. All of it converging into one global clock, ticking toward Q4 2025. And while those pipes are being welded together, something even more important is happening on-chain. Liquidity migration. Since July, exchange balances have dropped to their lowest levels since 2017, while institutional wallets have risen 27%. That's not retail panic. That's reserve formation. Once liquidity moves off exchanges into custody accounts, it's not coming back. That's the silent supply shock that precedes every major repricing. Think of it like watching water drain from a lake before a dam opens. On the surface, everything looks still, but below, flow pressure is building. And when the gates lift, the system doesn't ramp up gradually. It surges. That's the moment this entire setup is pointing toward. Not hype, not a tweet. A mechanical revaluation driven by function. Because when Ripple flips the switch from testing to production, XRP stops being traded for profit. It's held for utility. Banks, remittance firms, and CBDC providers will need guaranteed throughput. They'll lock liquidity. And the minute they do, the market realizes the float is gone. That's why every insider wallet, from SBI to Tranglo to CBX Holdings, keeps accumulating and never selling. They're not waiting for a pump. They're stockpiling fuel for a system that can't run without it. So if you hold 1,000 XRP, you don't just own a coin, you own a piece of the plumbing of the future financial internet. The hidden report wasn't a mistake. It was the first crack in the curtain showing how valuation is about to be based on necessity, not narrative. And when that shift happens, price won't rise because of hype. It'll snap into its functional range. That's the moment the chart stops looking like crypto and starts behaving like monetary infrastructure. So remember this when the news feeds stay quiet. The biggest events in finance never trend first. They activate quietly, then rewrite the rules overnight. And when this activation goes live, it won't be a headline. It'll be a timestamp. You'll wake up one morning and the asset you were told was just a coin will already be woven into the world's liquidity grid. And the people who saw it coming, the ones who studied the leaks, the documents, and the timelines, will be the new class of holders the system depends on. Because in this game, information is positioning, and you've just seen the part they didn't want you to. This isn't financial advice. It's a reminder that some truths don't break news. They quietly build empires. So whether you've held XRP for years or just found this video today, remember this. History doesn't wait for headlines. It's written by those who position before the spotlight. Make sure you catch the next video in my library so you don't miss highly valuable information. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.